Judge Rinder and his mum. Rob has said that being made an MBE on the same day as his mother, Angela Cohen, has made the experience all the richer and all the more beautiful. I bet it has. Both are being honoured for services to Holocaust education and Holocaust awareness.
We're going to talk to them in just a moment. First, here's a look at when they met the last survivor of Treblinka in their documentary, My Family, the Holocaust and Me. That was 92-year-old Leon Reid.
Holocaust deniers. We still have Holocaust deniers. Rob Rinder and his mum Angela are on the other side. Hi. I guess, for me, actually, this must be one of the most satisfying awards you could have got, because I talk about Holocaust denial. This is an absolute arrow in the heart of that nonsense, isn't it? To be honoured like this.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, you know, in a year when so many other people deserve gongs, I have to say, you know, I think we both feel sort of slightly self-conscious about it. So you ask the question, you know, what does a gong, what does an honour really do? And, you know, Mum has worked so hard building on the success of the 45 Aid Society, which is exactly as you describe. It's an organisation that brings about witnessing. And what does that mean? Just as you saw Leon Reid standing there on that ground, not just speaking his truth, a word or a phrase that's become too commonly used. It's about the truth. And for the Queen to honour, well, us, but it's much more of a broader narrative, which is exactly as you described, Richard, shining light on the truth. And that's where and what we need to bring light into the dark places and the recesses of the world of those who would seek to use whatever platform they get to deny the Holocaust, and above all else, not just to deny the Holocaust, but to use whatever space and dark oxygen they have for all sorts of anti-Jewish racism and all hate.
I mean, it's such a powerful moment, that moment, Angela, because, you know, we end that clip with you saying, we must tell the story.
And that's what we have to do. We have to tell it because the story, unfortunately, is as relevant today as it was then. For me, it's very much...
Can you just explain what you mean by that? When
Absolutely,
I know what you mean, but just explain it.
Yeah, of course I will. Unfortunately, with racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, bullying, it's out there. You can't pick up a newspaper, you can't listen to radio, television without hearing these words. But it has to begin somewhere. And it began there, the wrong man at the right time. Nobody ever thought the most...
You mean Hitler?
Absolutely, I do. And it was the most sophisticated country in the world, Germany. Intellectuals, musicians, lawyers, doctors. And that's what's happened.
Yes.
And my God, we have to learn from history. Yeah. And that's why I have to tell my dad's story.
Angela, just explain what your father's experience was and that of his family.
Of course. My father's family were bakers. He came from a small town in Poland called Pietikov.
In Poland, yeah.
Tiny little town. I mean, my dad's lived in a tiny flat with 6 of them. And an amazing story for me, very much so, is that I knew my dad's mother's name because I'm named after her. I knew his father's name. I did not know the name of his brother or 4 siblings. The youngest was 7
what actually
when
happened?
The war. Hitler came in. My father went to work in what was a glass factory. His siblings ended up in Treblinka, where they were murdered, and that's where I went with Rob. And I saw where they were murdered, and I actually stood there and met a wonderful young professor, and I said to her, where am I standing? You know, because it was flattened. And she said to me, this is where the train would have stopped. And 35 minutes later, they would have been gassed.
They were gassed?
Gassed in the...
How many family members did you lose then?
Every single one.
Which is how many?
Every single one. Well, there were 6 of them and probably 60, 70... I don't know, because there's no real family tree, there's no history. The youngest little girl, Miriam, you know, she had a name, she was 7. And it was only in 2004, after I lost my dad, I found out the names of his siblings.
It's an amazing thing, just standing on that ground and Mum's courage to be there. You know, these are not people at arm's length from you. They're your aunts and uncles. And just as Mum said, you know, it's important not for us to think of this taking place and emerging in some cultural backwater, you know, an explosion of violence against one unassimilated community against another. It happened exactly as you described, in a moment where people felt that they were at the forefront of democracy, and it's a warning to history, just as you described, against complacency. But you know, the most amazing thing, Richard, I just want to say, just because we've got the chance, is that when you saw Leon Ritz there, Mum went to make, it's very moving, I haven't seen that clip for a while, the memorial prayer. That's the mission of us going there. You know, it's part of our Jewish tradition, so many traditions, where you go and commemorate those who have passed in order to breathe life back into them, in order to give them back, if you like, the spirit that they were denied. And just as we were about to do that, you'll remember, Leon put his arm around us and he said, as we were going to say the names of our family, to give them and restore that dignity, he said, no, no, this is for all of the living people of the world. At that moment, that he had and has, as all of the survivors do, an enduring sense of optimism and hope for humanity.
But given that this was, as you just referred to, this was a hugely coordinated, hugely sophisticated attempt to eradicate Jewish people in Europe, to kill them all. And had Germany won the war, that's what would have happened. You must reflect in a way that those of us who aren't Jewish in this generation, you must reflect sometimes, Rob, the miracle that you're even here.
Sure. No, I do reflect on that miracle. But let's think about what you just said there for a second, Richard. Yes, it happened to Jewish people. We also asked the question, and other communities, we asked the question, how and why did that happen? And it took a great deal of dark alchemy. Above all else, it took those who weren't members of those oppressed communities to stand back and to do nothing. As we all know, sitting here, as your viewers know at home, for bad things to happen, it takes good people to do nothing. And I always think about this, it's something that you've definitely taught me about decency and about being good. And I was watching Maya Angelou the other day, and she says, you know, you can't practice any of the virtues consistently, no matter how good you are, without courage. Right. And that courage is for each and every one of us.
You're absolutely right about letting it happen. Just briefly, I'm very familiar with a little town in France, a little place called Vence. And there's what looks like a war memorial as you go into the town. It's in beautiful white marble, quite small, about two pillars, about 6 feet high. And when I first looked at it, I thought it was to the war dead in France, or the resistance. And it's not. It's to all the Jewish children and parents who were rounded up in 2 separate operations. Firstly, by the Gestapo in 1942, and transported to the death camps and killed. And then by the Vichy forces, the French themselves. You talk about, you know, cooperation or standing back. They didn't just stand back. They actually took their own people, their own community, and put them on the trains. And you're right, it can happen like that. Right. It can happen in a heartbeat.
And so that's why I guess I'm so proud of this. And if you like, the message of the 45 Aid Society and all of the work you do.
Yeah, which is the charity set up by Holocaust survivors. 700 Jewish children were brought to the UK.
They were brought to the UK, most of them having lost their entire families, and they formed the 45 Aid Society. And their raison d'etre was all about giving back to their adopted country, which they loved, but also education and teaching the lessons of the Holocaust.
Well, huge congratulations on your awards.
Thank you so much.
It's wonderful you both got it.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Well, how would, Rob and Angela, how would you describe your relationship with each other?
Oh, well, we're friends, aren't we? I mean, obviously, we're worried about coordinating outfits for the for the palace. You know, like
you've done a beautiful job. Angela, how would you describe Rob? You must be. I know that Rob is bursting with pride about you every time he talks about you.
Oh,
brimming
that's so
over
lovely.
with love. It's lovely.
And I burst pride when I look at him. Honestly, he makes me feel 6'8". So
I think, I mean, you know, inevitably, you love your kids. There's nothing you can do to legislate against that, and your mum. But I think the proof of the pudding is when you grow up whether you really like one another.
Yeah. Well, that's coming over in shovelfuls. Yeah. It's lovely to see you both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.